Good afternoon, everybody. Good news. Our new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, says that she has a plan, a clear plan for the future. And in an interview this morning, that's what she said. And then she was asked later on in the interview, it was on the BBC. I'm not a big fan of the BBC, but never mind. She was asked anyway to give details of the plan. And then she said in her own way, well, we will give details of the plan in the future when we know what the plan is, or something like that. So it seems like she's got a plan to discuss plans to make a plan sometime in the future when they plan another announcement to announce the plan, which doesn't seem to have much substance or existence in the present time. But there you go. She's made this announcement, and the other interesting thing was, all of these economic announcements in the mini budget by Kwasi Kwarteng over a week ago now, which have caused market turmoil in the UK. And she was asked, well, did you discuss this with the cabinet? And she just said, no. That was the Chancellor's decision. So, the guy is like getting the rap for it. Look, I mean, markets, they go up and they go down. If they're not expecting something, if something unusual happens that they haven't factored in, they respond by just going crazy for a bit and then they stabilize. I mean, this is something, if you're watching the markets, this has happened many, many times before when something unexpected happens. But I think this is, what we're seeing, what we saw last week is something perhaps deeper, and it's not just because of the mini budget by Kwasi Kwarteng. It's because of the huge increase in national debt that we've been building up in this country over the 12 years of the Conservative prime ministers and Blair and Brown before, even going back to 1971 when the whole Western world came off the gold standard. In the UK, the last 50 years, there's only been 1 year out of the last 50 years where we've actually paid down a little bit of our national debt, where we've had a budget surplus. 49 out of 50 years, the last 50 years, we've had a budget deficit. And so the national debt's been going up and up and up and up and up. And now it stands at 2.4 trillion, something like that, which is not going to be paid back for 100 years, and that's if we just stop borrowing now. If we said right now we're going to be financially responsible, we're going to live within our means, we would still be paying back this national debt, long before I've gone, way after I've gone, and our children and grandchildren's generation will be still paying that back until finally we could be financially free as a nation. That's the profligacy of all the prime ministers over the last 50 years. But interestingly, let's talk about the actual measures in Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget. Because, to be honest with you, I don't think it's too bad. And, people say, oh, it's terrible, they cut the top rate of tax from 45 to 40%. I'm no fan of the fake Conservative Party, but I don't think that's a bad thing, to be honest, at all. And it isn't going to make too much difference to the tax take because of the magic of the Laffer curve, which is one of the most incredible things in economics. It makes sense. Sometimes if you increase tax beyond the sweet spot where you get the maximum tax revenue, then the government tax income starts to go down. So, you go from zero, I think this side, zero, and zero, you go up, and then you increase the tax rate, and then tax take goes up, and then it starts to go down as you go towards 100%. So there's a sweet spot at the top of the curve, the top of the Laffer curve, which is where you want your tax rate to be. And so you can increase your tax take all the way up to that sweet spot But if you go beyond it, your tax take actually goes down in terms of total revenue, which makes sense. If you double the rate of tax from, say, 10 to 20%, yeah, the government will double its income because you're still on this part of the curve. If you double the tax rate from 20 to 40%, okay, you might go up or you might go beyond the top of the curve. So you'll get more. But if you increase the tax rate from, say, 40% to 80% or 50% to 100%, well, the government gets less because you're on that part of the curve where your total revenue is going down. And of course, that makes sense because, if the government increases tax from 40 to 80%, they'll get less because people stop working. Because people think, well, what's the point of me working more if the government's going to take 80% of what I earn? So people just stop working. Or people who are rich, just leave the country and they go and domicile themselves in Singapore or the Cayman Islands or something, so they don't have to pay tax here. So, I think probably 45% is probably on the downward part of the curve. So, bringing it back up to 40%, I think it probably makes sense. And it isn't going to make much difference to overall tax revenue. And, tax is essentially the government taking your money. So the more you earn, the more you pay. So I actually don't have any problem with them reducing the top rate of tax from 45 to 40%. They may even get more because people might work harder and people might, stay in this country more, and because the rates are more competitive, and they might even increase their revenue. I don't know. You never know until you actually do it. But that's not a massive issue. The bankers' bonuses thing as well. Now, this is something that people are getting really, really wound up about. Oh, it's terrible. They've taken the cap off the bankers' bonuses. Again, it's not something I, lose sleep over, because it isn't going to affect the fiscal situation in terms of government finances. In fact, that probably will increase government revenue because if bankers get bonuses and bigger bonuses, they'll pay more tax on it and the government will get higher tax revenue. So, I'm not in favour generally of a government putting a cap on earnings because, they've had this cap on bankers' bonuses, and that was really a social statement. And I understand the social statement after the last financial crash in 2008. Government said we're going to cap bankers' bonuses because these people have behaved atrociously. They've been treating the economy like a casino, making huge amounts of money out of it, and we need to stop this. And so that they're not incentivized to take crazy risks with our economy. So, that was the reason for having that there. So to keep it on for that reason, if they explained it, that would be fine. But, to put a cap on just one sector, you have to make the argument as well. Well, if you're going to put a cap on bankers' bonuses, why don't you put a cap on directors' dividends, or shareholders' dividends, or entertainers' salaries, BBC presenters' salaries, or sportsmen's salaries and bonuses as well. They all earn as much as bankers or more. So, if you're going to make the argument for one sector, you should make it for all the sectors and say, well, it's nobody should earn over a certain amount, so we're going to put a cap on earnings for everybody. But, nobody would do that for everybody, unless you're in a communist country. So, that's not something that I think is a really big issue at all. That's the sort of thing that people are really getting wound up about because of the morality of bankers rather than the sort of earnings themselves. But anyway, what I would have done differently, I think, is instead of reducing income tax by a penny from 20p to 19p, I've left it at 20p. And I probably would have increased corporation tax by 1p, so maybe 19p to 20p, which wouldn't hurt businesses too much. I think it's absolutely right they didn't increase corporation tax from 19 to 26p, because that would have really hurt businesses. But we do have a difficult fiscal situation. We do need to try to get more money least painful way possible and the most painless way possible into the Treasury so that we can start to pay down our debt and to reduce the budget deficit, first of all. I think they're absolutely right to scrap the increase in national insurance as well by 1.25%, which was going to come in. That's not going to come in now, which is very good. But, you could have increased corporation tax by 1p to 20p to make up for that. And then individual people wouldn't have been hurt. It would go on to business profits, but that wouldn't really affect the economy too much. And it would ease the fiscal situation somewhat, to a small extent, maybe 10 billion pounds or something. Now, the question then on this interview in the BBC turned to, well, it was all accusatory. Are you going to cut government spending? And Liz Truss wouldn't give a straight answer again. And her answer was something like, well, we're going to make sure that we get value for money for the taxpayer. She talks like that. She has this strange inflection at the end of every sentence. And it's because of Putin. It always goes back to blaming Putin for everything. When Putin's got hardly anything to do with the gross irresponsibility of government's financial irresponsibility over the last 50 years, including pursuing this insane net zero ideology whereby we've dismantled a lot of our own energy infrastructure, and therefore countries are reliant on Russia for gas, but now the countries of the West have put sanctions on Russia, so they're not buying Russian gas. That's not Putin's fault. That's the fault of Western sanctions on Russia. But what she was saying when they asked her about, are you going to cut spending? She wouldn't give a straight answer. They asked her, this was Laura Kuenssberg, asked her this morning on the BBC interview, 3 times are you going to cut government spending? And 3 times or more, Liz Truss wouldn't give a straight answer. She kept on saying, I'm going to just make sure we get value for money for the taxpayer. Well, I would have said, you're damn right we're going to cut government spending. Government spending has been totally profligate and wasteful for the last 50 years. We spend billions of pounds on rubbish that we don't need. HS2, hotels for migrants, diversity officers, subsidies for wind power, subsidies for solar power, all kinds of other things that we don't sort of pay EU fees anymore, but there's foreign aid, 14 billion pounds of foreign aid. Yeah, I'd keep 3 or 4 billion for disaster and emergency relief run by the military, but 10 billion pounds a year going on stuff that we have no clue where it goes to most of the time. It just goes into a black hole. We spend as much on foreign aid as we do on the police services in England and Wales combined. It's ridiculous. NGOs, funding NGOs all over the place, including things like Stonewall and Mermaids, which are now sort of very much being questioned as to what they do, and all the quangos that they run in the government, rather than running things in-house from the Ministry of Health or Department of Health, Department for Education, whatever. They have all these quangos that they outsource things to, and they all need money as well to keep them going. So there's billions, tens of billions of pounds of waste which the government just throws down a black hole every year, including all the inefficiencies in things like the NHS, which is one of the most grossly inefficient organisations in the world. Its budget has gone up by about 4 times over the last 20 years, and it still has completely terrible outcomes in terms of patient care for many, many people. Waiting lists for 5 years or so now. And all the wastage that we've had over the last 2 years of lockdown and furlough and all this PPE equipment that they bought, with a lot of it, billions of pounds of it, is just unusable. It's been thrown away. That's billions and billions of pounds down a black hole. So there's huge amounts of inefficiency and wastage in government spending. So I would have said to that question, yeah, we're gonna cut government spending really, really severely in order to bring our expenditure level back with our income, so that we don't spend more than we get in tax take in terms of, you know, direct taxation, and then we don't need to borrow anymore, so we get the borrowing requirement down to zero or even negative, so that we can start to pay back our national debt, which of course then will be good for inflation, because increasing the national debt increases inflation. If you don't increase the national debt, then that's deflationary to some extent, or it reduces inflation, which is what we need to do, because that's one of the things which is causing the inflation problem, which is hurting families and businesses all over the country. So she didn't seem to have a plan about that. And didn't seem to want to mention that, but I think that's what I would do, and that's the difference between me and people who can actually speak freely and do have a plan, rather than these fake conservatives who are just seem to be making things up on the hoof, and are not really too much different to Labour, Lib Dem, Green, fake conservative, SNP. They'd all essentially do very similar things and continue wrecking our economy. So let's vote them out next time. And for the Heritage Party, we just had a conference last Saturday, which is a wonderful, wonderful day. Lots of people came, had a great day. We're putting the speeches up over this week and so on. Please have a look at them and read our manifesto, and come and join us in the Heritage Party. Come and stand for us, support us, vote for us, please. Or even, you know, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to our channels as well, and give us thumbs up on social media. At least that helps us. But please do consider getting involved, because we need to build a movement that can get rid of all these people who have been running our country into the ground for the last 25 years or more, and start to rebuild our nation again. So if you can do that, please do join in. Okay, thank you everybody. God bless you all.